Welcome, Professor Xing. Thank you so much for allowing me to interview you.
Thank you too.
Xing is a professor of development and international relations at Aalborg University in Denmark. He is on the social science faculty at the Institute for Politics and Society, and he is director of the Research Center on Development and International Relations. Xing, as we speak, there is an overhanging threat of war between the United States and NATO against Russia and China, countries which the war faction in the West sees as a threat to the disintegrating unipolar Anglo-American world dominance. On the other hand, the Schiller Institute has led an international campaign to try to get the US and Europe to cooperate with Russia and China to solve the great crises in the world, especially the pandemic, the financial and economic crises, the underdevelopment of the poor countries, and the cultural crisis in the West. Our international president, Helge Zeppler-Rouge, has stated that the US-China relationship will be the most important relationship in the future. You recently gave a lecture at the Danish Institute for International Studies about the US-China rivalry. And you are a contributor to the book, The Telegram, A China Agenda for President Biden by Sarwar Kashmiri, which was published by the Foreign Policy Association in New York City, about what the contributors would say if they were granted a personal meeting with President Biden. What would your advice be to President Biden regarding China?
Yes, thank you for giving me this chance for this interview. If I had the chance to meet the president, I would say to the president, hello, President Biden. I think that it is pity that you didn't change Trump's China policy, especially regarding the trade war and the tariff. And seeing from the current situation, we can see that in the US, the shortage issue, the inflation issue, these are all connected with tariff issue. So now many congressmen and senators call for removal of tariff. So I really think that the president should give a second thought on the trade war. And on the contrary, the data from 2020 and 2021 shows that the China-US trade surge actually almost 30% compared with early years. So trade war didn't work. The second issue is on the competition, competition in the area of high technology areas, especially regarding the chip industry. Now the US has the technology, the upper hand, and China has the largest market. So I think that if US continue to use technology sanction on Chinese chips, so then the whole country and the whole nation will increase the investment on the chips. So once China has technology, then the US would both lose the market and also lose technology. So this is the second issue I think the president should give a thought. The third issue, I think it's a very touchy issue, which is the Taiwan issue, that I really advised the president that to play Taiwan card needs caution, okay? Because Taiwan is the center of the Chinese politics, the historical memory, and the most important national project in the unification. So to play the Taiwan card needs really caution. But still, I would also say to the president that China-US has a lot of areas. They have a lot of areas for cooperation, for example, climate change, for example, North Korea, Iran, Afghanistan. And last not least, that China has great technology and skill in terms of infrastructure. So Biden should invite China to go to the US and play a role in the US infrastructure project. That would be an ideal situation to promote bilateral relations.
In your article about the telegram, you addressed the question of if the United States should consider China as an enemy or as a rival. What would you say to the American people about the attitude that the United States should have towards China?
I don't think the US should regard China as an enemy, but the rival, I think there is certain truth in that, because that obviously China is a rival to the United States on many, many grounds, both in terms of material and also in terms of ideation. So that China does present kind of rivalry to the US, but nevertheless, it is not enemy. That China-US have so many areas cooperation. As you point out, that this bilateral relation is the most important bilateral relation in the world. So if we turn this relationship into enemy relationship, then it is a disaster to the world.
Chinese President Xi Jinping recently spoke at the World Economic Forum in Davos. What do you think is the most important for people in the West to understand about his speech?
Yes, Xi Jinping was invited to the World Economic Forum, and he sent some messages. Okay, if we read his address, and he said that economic globalization has created problems that he admitted, but this is not a justification to write off everything regarding globalization or regarding international cooperation. So he suggests that the world should adapt and guide globalization. Okay, and he also says, and he also rejects this kind of protectionist forces on the rise in the West, and he said that history has proved time and time again that confrontation does not solve problems, and it only invites catastrophic consequences. And also he mentioned particularly on protectionism, unilateralism, which he indirectly referred to the US, that he emphasized that these phenomena will only hurt interests of others as well as his own, which means that he said that the US trade war or sanctions against China will hurt both. It's not a win-win, okay, it's lose-lose. And his message is that that he rejects a zero-sum approach, okay? So I think it's a very constructive message from President Xi Jinping. He totally rejects, if I interpret his address, Cold War mentality. He doesn't want to see Cold War mentality emerge both in the US and in China.
Let's move on now to the question of the Belt and Road Initiative. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Schiller Institute has worked to establish a new Silk Road, the World Land Bridge, and many of these economic principles have been coming to life through China's Belt and Road Initiative. Lixing, you have written a book mapping China's One Belt, One Road Initiative in 2019, and you have given lectures about this. How has the Belt and Road Initiative created economic development in the underdeveloped countries?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I think that we need to understand the Belt and Road, the concept, the historicity behind Belt and Road. That the Belt and Road is not an international aid program. That we have to keep in mind. It is an infrastructure project attempting to link Eurasia. Okay, so it has two routes. One is land routes, consisting of 6 corridors. Then it has another called sea route, maritime Belt and Road. Okay, and now globally, about 138 countries signed Belt and Road memorandum, ranging from Italy to Saudi to Cambodia. Right now, there is another country in newly, I can't remember, in Latin America, which signed a Belt and Road document as well. And the idea of the Belt and Road is basically founded on the two Chinese economic strengths. One is surplus capital. China has huge surplus capital in the bank, which China can use as investment. The second is that after 40 years infrastructure development in China, China has huge technology and skill, particularly in infrastructure development area. So Belt and Road is basically an infrastructure development project. The driving force of China's Belt and Road is because that after 40 years of economic development, China is experiencing a similar situation which the advanced country experienced in the world economic history. For example, rising wage, overproduction, overcapacity, a lot of surplus capital. So China is looking for what Marxist analytical lens called spatial fix. Okay, domestic market, domestic production, manufacturing is getting constrained. China needs to look for beyond Chinese territory. And if you look at Chinese neighbors, all the countries around China, they are actually very lag behind in infrastructure development. So it's kind of win-win situation. The idea behind it, okay, it's kind of win-win situation. Historically, if you look at the US Marshall Plan and also US military aid in East Asia, Marshall Plan in Europe and the military aid in East Asia, we could also say that these are also the historical Belt and Road project, okay, helping those countries to enhance economic development. I recently come across a World Bank study pointing out that if Belt and Road is successfully implemented, that the whole region, their real income could rise between 2 or 4 times, okay? And at the global level, the real income can rise between 0.7 and 2.9%. So you can see it is, even according to the international financial institution, economic institution like World Bank, also very positive towards Belt and Road. However, Belt and Road also has some areas which we need to concern. For example, debt trap, which has been discussed quite a lot at global level. And transparency, whether the Belt and Road project in different countries are transparent. This is on the issue for debate. Corruption, so the issue of corruption, whether that the investment in those countries from China can create corruption by local officials, okay? The number 4 area for concern is environmental social cost, okay? So these definitely needs to be taken care of both by China and those countries. So as a whole, I think that the Belt and Road project is huge. It's very constructive, but we also need to look at some kind of, can create some kind of a bad effect. We need to tackle those effects collectively.
When you spoke just about this question of the debt trap, we have actually, especially our correspondent who covers the Muslim world, Hossein Askari, and also covers developments in Africa. He has tried to go against this idea that China is creating a debt trap, pointing out that many of the countries owe much more money to Western powers than they do to China, and that China has done things like forgiving debt or transferring the assets to those governments, or because this debt trap question that has been used as the primary argument against the Belt and Road. But do you think that that this is legitimate argument, or that this is overplayed to try to just create suspicion about the Belt and Road?
No, I fully agree actually with the comment you just quote from another study. Okay, actually that it is true that the death trap was used or has been used by Western media or those politicians who are against Belt and Road as an excuse, as a kind of a dark picture. But according to my research, that China actually knows this problem, and very often Chinese government use different measurements or different policies to tackle this problem. One of them is to write off in case if they really suffer, this kind of return of Chinese investment, this problem. But for example, Chinese government announced that during the pandemic period, all countries who need to pay the interest of debt, stop, okay? Wait until economic situation, returns. So the Chinese, because it is central government-based country. China has a central government. The state policy play a big role rather than the political system in the West, where you have a very kind of different interest groups which drive country's policy into different directions. So the Chinese central government can play a big role in tackling the problem of debt trap.
And what just back to the question, what has this meant for the underdeveloped countries? For example, Africa, other poorer countries in Asia, in Ibero-America. What has the Belt and Road Initiative meant for their economic development?
But if you look at the increased number of countries that have signed the Belt and Road project, you can see actually the Belt and Road project is comparatively quite welcomed. I have also followed many debates in Africa, where many African leaders were asked the questions, and they completely disagree. That they say that the situation on the debt trap of the old time, okay, the experience with the colonial countries is quite different from the debt trap which is connected with China's investment project or development project. So they still have a confidence in China's foreign development policies, and also especially in the Belt and Road project. I think they have a strong confidence on that, following what I have read, following the reports, many study reports which I have read so far.
And what would you say the role of the infrastructure development was in China for creating this unprecedented economic growth and lifting people out of poverty? How does the infrastructure development projects, how does that, what role does that play in the incredible poverty elimination policy that China actually succeeded in this year?
Yeah, the entire 40 years history of China's economic growth, China's economic development, and China's prosperity is based on the lesson that infrastructure is one of the most important factors leading to China's economic success. That's why China has a slogan within China that if you want to get rich, build a road. Okay, so it means that that infrastructure really is the area which is connected with every aspect of national economy. Okay, raw material, steel industry, metal industry, and you name it. Okay, cement industry and etc. The infrastructure is really the center of a nation's economy, which can really push different different areas of the economy running. Okay, so I think this experience of China is really a good lesson, not only for China itself, but also for the rest of the world, especially for developing countries. So that's why that China's Belt and Road project, which is identified as infrastructure project, is really welcomed by many people, and especially Biden now, even though that his budget idea was not passed because of the resistance or it's shrinked, but still the idea about that improving U.S. infrastructure become a kind of the hotspot today. Okay, so I think that the U.S. needs to increase its infrastructure investment as well, definitely.
Let's move on to Europe and China relations. You have edited the book, China-US Relations at a Crossroads, Systemic Rivalry or Strategic Partnership. What is your evaluation and recommendation about the European-Chinese relations? And also, when we were speaking before, you had a comment about the impact on the question of African development, if there would be development or not, how that would impact Europe, if you could also include your idea about that.
Yes, and your EU-China relations are increasingly complex and affected by a number of interrelated factors, such as China's rise, growing China-US rivalry, and US global withdrawal, especially under the Trump administration, the transatlantic split, the Brexit, and at the same time, China-Russia comprehensive alliance. Okay, so under these broad transformations of global order, that EU-China relations are also getting much complex. Okay, so right now, I'm feeling that the EU and China are struggling to look for a dynamic and durable mode of engagement in an attempt to achieve the balance between opportunities on the one side and challenges on the other side, and also between partnership on the one side and rivalry on the other side. For instance, that China and the EU successfully reached what we called a comprehensive investment treaty at the end of 2020. It was a joyful momentum. However, 2021, due to the Hong Kong issue, Xinjiang issue, and mutual sanctions, this investment treaty was suspended, not abandoned, but suspended. So you can see that the relationship can be hurt by a kind of event. So EU is really in a difficult position to find a balance between strategic partnership and systemic rivalry. Now, systemic rivalry was officially termed by a European Commission document 2019. And it says that how EU defines systemic rivalry, that China is an economic competitor in the pursuit of technological leadership, okay, and a systemic rival promoting alternative models of governance. So you can see that the systemic rival means alternative norms, values. That's why that the EU termed China in that way. It shows that China's development has both material impact and also ideational impact, that many countries are becoming attracted by the Chinese success. So in that way, that the rise of China is increasingly regarded as systemic rival. Okay, but on the other hand, that I also the message from my book is that the EU must, in one way or another, become autonomous, and also needs to design its independent China policy. sometimes I feel that that EU-China policy is somehow pushed around or carried with by the US global interest or affected by US-China competition. So I really think that the EU needs independent China policy, and also EU now is thinking of defense independence. Okay, that's something else. According to Kishore Mahbubani, a very well-known Singaporean public intellectuals or professors, and according to his data, he shows that that the Belt and Road has special meaning to Europe in relation to Africa. This is one of the importance in your question is that Africa, on the issue of Africa. And according to his data, that the demographic explosion in Africa, Africa's population in 1950s was half of that of Europe. Today, African population is 2.5 times of Europe. By 2100, Africa's population will be 10 times of that of Europe. So if Africa still suffer from underdevelopment, if any crisis appeared, where Africans refugees migration will move to, where? Europe. So from Kishore's point of view, that Belt and Road is doing a favor to Europe. So Europe should be very supportive to China's Belt and Road project. That I agree, I totally agree. That is also, what he just said is also part of the message by my book.
Back to, you were speaking about the question of Europe becoming more autonomous in its relations with China. Chancellor Merkel from Germany has stated openly, we will not be forced to choose between the United States or China, that we need to have relations with both. And can you say more about, I mean, right now, I think China is China Europe's biggest trading partner, or yes. How does that?
China is Europe big since November last year.
Mm-hmm. And also there's differentiation inside Europe. For example, the Eastern European countries, what they have a forum called 16+1, where the 16 Eastern European countries plus one is China, have a more developed Belt and Road cooperation with China than do the Western countries. And there's differentiation in the different Western countries. I don't know if you want to say something about this, that you mentioned the question of Hong Kong and Xinjiang as being an obstacle to, some are making this as an obstacle to improving European relations to China. What would you say to these concerns?
Yeah, as a China-EU relations are being affected by many factors. One is, as you mentioned, about 16+1, but now it's 17+1, because I think 2 years ago, Greece was part of 16+1, so now 17+1. And the Western part of the EU, was quite worried about this 17+1, because that the Western part of the EU think that the Belt and Road plays a role of dividing Europe. Okay, so because Europe has this common policy, common strategy and common action, but the Belt and Road 17+1 somehow playing a role of dividing. So EU is not very happy on that. Okay, because you are right, the Belt and Road cover more intensively on the eastern part of the EU. Okay, and this is one issue. And the second issue is that EU has to make a balance between China on the one side and US on the other side. So right now, my assessment is that EU is somehow being pushed to choose the US side. It's fine to me, from my point of view, from my analytic point of view, that the EU, most of the countries in the West, they are traditionally US allies, which is totally fine, like including Denmark. If they choose US, that's fine. But my position is that their choice of choosing other side should be based on their own analysis, on their own national interests, not on purely on the so-called value and norms. Is that the US and the EU, they share norms and they should be natural alliance. I think that is not correct. And I always advise Western politicians, think tanks, policymakers that they should study China-US relations or EU-China-US relations and try to find out that their foreign policies, what is the correct direction, and based on their own judgment, based on their own research results, not based on what US want them to do.
Mm. Yeah, I was actually going to ask you a question just before the last one about the European relations, that a former top diplomat in Denmark, Friis Anna Petersen, he was ambassador in the United States, in China, and in Germany. He recently, at the Danish Institute for International Studies, he called for Europe to join with the Belt and Road Initiative. Why do you think it would be in Europe and the United States' interest to join or cooperate with the Belt and Road Initiative instead of treating it as a geopolitical threat?
Well, on the Belt and Road, we have already discussed previously. And first, that we have to understand, I fully agree with Friis Peter Andersen. When he was the ambassador in Beijing, I met him in one of the international conference. He was always very positive towards Denmark, China cooperation. I fully agree with his point on Belt and Road, but we have to understand, first of all, why the West are nervous about Belt and Road. Okay, this is very important because that the Europeans or the Americans, their worry is based on two perspectives. One is geopolitics. The second is norm diffusion. Geopolitics means that through Belt and Road, China's economic political influence will gradually be expanding to cover the entire Eurasia, okay, and which is not in the interest of the West, okay. This is a geopolitical rationale, okay. Then the second is norm diffusion, which means that through the Belt and Road Chinese development model, okay, as I mentioned before, global attraction on a Chinese development model will be consolidated, also expanding through the Belt and Road. And that is also not in the interest of the West. That's why China is systemic rival, because that it has norm diffusion effect, okay. So we have to understand these two aspects, but why that Europe should support, I have already discussed about on this issue in your previous question regarding the importance of infrastructure development and regarding why that Europe should support, especially in a context of thinking of Africa.
Africa, right. And the US, you also spoke about in terms of the absolute need for infrastructure development in the United States.
Yeah.
I think the Engineers Association has given the United States something like a D+ evaluation of the infrastructure in the United States. Is so poor. If you look at the comparison between high-speed rail in China and in the United States. There's nothing to compare with China going towards the 50,000, committed to 50,000 kilometers, and the US has maybe 150 kilometers.
I was told by American friends that she got the data from somewhere that the US has not invested on infrastructure, heavily on infrastructure, in about many decades.
Yeah.
Somehow it's about half century, something like that. I was shocked to hear that. So I think that the Biden's idea of infrastructure investment is great, but somehow the suggestion could not be agreed in the Congress and also in the Senate due to the partisan conflict.
Yeah. And it was not very ambitious in any case.
Yeah,
it was a step in the right direction, but it was not very ambitious.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Latin America, which we call Ibero-America. That's because our people are saying that the Spanish language did not proceed from Latin, but it would be better to call it the Ibero, because the Iberian Peninsula is Portugal and Spain. So it would be a better term to call it Ibero-America. But in any case, Lixing, you are working on a study, China-US rivalry and regional reordering in Latin America. Can you please share the main idea with us?
Yes, I'm working on a book together with a group of Latin American scholars from different countries in the region. The objective of the book is to provide a good conceptualization first, of the changing world order and the reordering process. When we talk about that world order is changing under the US-China rivalry, at the same time, we also suggest that the world is also experiencing reordering process. That we do not know the future order or the new order, but the world is in the process of reordering, driven by China-US rivalry, And it's also that the book tried to convey that the US-China rivalry, according to our conceptualization, is intra-core. Core means that the advanced economies, it's core. According to the world system theory, you have a core, which is advanced country, then you have a semi-periphery, and then you have a periphery. Semi-periphery is between periphery and the core, and the periphery is the vast developing countries. So China-US rivalry competition, especially high technologies in the security areas, these are between the core countries or intra-core countries. Then China-US also represents a struggle between two types of capitalism. On the one side is the Chinese state capitalism, very centralized, kind of state-led with central planning. The other side is the US free market, free capitalist, individual capitalist economy. And somehow China's model is gradually appear to be more competitive. Of course, that the US doesn't agree, but at least from the current perspectives. So this rivalry must have a great impact on the whole world, and especially on the developing world, we call global South. And here we've tried to focus on the US-China rivalry and its impact on the Latin American and Caribbean region. So the message of the book is first that the global redistribution of power is inevitable, is still on the process. And the emerging world order will likely to be dominated by more than one superpower. So the world order will likely look like a polycentric world, okay, with a number of parallel century petals competing for high positions or strong positions. Okay, this is the first message. The second message is that the situation shows that the world is in a reordering process, okay, driven by the competition between the two superpowers, and it poses opportunities and also constraints to different countries, regions, especially to the global south, such as Latin America, because Latin America is a US backyard, okay? It's part of American doctrines. What do we call this? Which that's North America and South America is part of a US influence.
You're talking about the Monroe Doctrine?
The Monroe Doctrine. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
It just hanging in my mind that North America, South America has to be within the US hegemonic influence. No external power should be allowed to have a hand in interference in these two regions. Okay, so you can see that China's relations with Latin America is really increasing tremendously during the past 2 decades. At the same time, US was busy in its anti-terrorism wars, in its creation of counter-revolutions in other parts of the world. And if you look at the investment infrastructure and also imports of agriculture, China, Latin American trade and Chinese investment in Latin America are increasing dramatically, which becomes a worry, really deep worry to the US. So the different scholars, chapter authors, they will use different countries and country cases as examples to provide empirical evidence to our theoretical conceptualization. So this book will be published by Brill, a very good publisher in Holland, around summer time.
Yeah, well, actually, the Monroe Doctrine was adopted in the very early history of the United States. This is when the United States had become a republic and had freed itself from the British Empire. And it was actually John Quincy Adams who was actually involved in where the idea was more that the United States should not allow imperial powers to destroy and to bring their great power games into Latin and South America, but in fact, the United States should help those countries to become independent republics.
Yeah.
So the question is more if the result of the Chinese policy would be to strengthen the ability of the Ibero-American countries to be republics because they would enjoy economic development, or if China's intention was a kind of imperialism. So,
So I think that based on your definitions, conceptualization of Monroe Doctrine, you can see that there are 2 implications. One is that the US should defend these 2 regions from imperialist intervention. The US itself was not imperialist power at that time. So US didn't have intentions to become a global interventionist, okay? But today it was a different situation. Second, that US definitely interpret Chinese investment and infrastructure corporations and economic investment in Latin America as helping, to consolidate countries' independence, etc. No, I don't think that is very kind of positive kind of sum game But today, unluckily, that these two countries are trapped into a zero-sum game. So whenever China is doing whatever China is doing in South American region is interpreted as not good for the United States. So that's a very unfortunate situation.
Yeah. Actually, we have spoken about if the United States would join with China to have even better economic development in Ibero-America, that would be a win-win policy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that would also, you spoke about the immigration challenge from Africa to Europe. It's the same thing from Ibero-America to United States, where people would much rather stay in their own countries if there were jobs, if there were economic development.
Exactly.
And if the United States would join with China, then instead of
building the wall, instead of building the wall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. Now we come to the question of Afghanistan. Helge Zepp-LaRouche, the president of the Schiller Institute, has stated that one very important way to lessen the war danger between United States, Russia, and China would be to join forces to save the people of Afghanistan, where there's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world now, after the war, the drought, and the freezing of Afghanistan's central bank assets by the Western countries. And she has proposed what she calls Operation Ibn Sina, named after the great doctor and philosopher from that region,
yes.
To build a modern health system in Afghanistan to save the people from disease and as a lever to stimulate economic development. I know that when we spoke about this Afghanistan question, you also said that there are very important discussions now going on in Oslo for the first time between the Taliban and Western governments, including in the United States. But what do you think about this idea of China and United States, also Russia and other countries joining hands to act to alleviate the terrible crisis for the people of Afghanistan?
It's a superb idea. This is one of the initiatives by Schiller Institute. When I read your website, you have Schiller Institute has many development projects, and this is so great idea. This is also what I mentioned, that the US-China could have common interest, and this is one of the common interest areas. Unfortunately, you know that what is happening today is that the Ukraine crisis and the China-US rivalry on so many battlefronts and makes Afghanistan less, attentive by global politicians. And right now, the Taliban delegation is talking with the West in Oslo, and I really hope there will be a constructive result, because after US withdrew from Afghanistan, Taliban government immediately went to China. And it was a Chinese interest. It was China's fundamental interest to help Afghanistan, because that if Afghanistan is safe and prosperous, then there will be no terrorism coming from Afghanistan across the border, because many of the terrorism from Xinjiang, they actually station themselves in Afghanistan. So it is in China's national interest to help Afghanistan. Right now, US, I don't know, US, whether it is still US interest to help Afghanistan. US might be tired of that region, because US lost $2 trillion in Afghanistan war without any positive results. So I do not know. I cannot tell the US politicians feeling. But US holds, I think how many, $2 billion US of Taliban's Afghanistan assets. And I think that money has to be released to help the country's rebuilding. And particularly Schiller Institute's suggestion of healthcare system is the priority, when people have in a good health, then people can work, can earn money. When people have a job or have a family, normally people do not move. Okay, according to the refugee studies, that people normally do not move just because of a shortage. People move because a devastated situation, either by war, by climate change, by various crises. Otherwise, people relatively stable or want to stay in their homeland.
Yeah, you mentioned Xinjiang again now. Do you have something to say about this Xinjiang question for people in the West?
I think that there are a lot of misunderstandings between the West and China, especially the misunderstanding from the Western side on Xinjiang. The other day, I saw a debate in Oxford University between an American former politician and British former politician, and they debate about whether China is foe or friend or foe. Okay, I think the American representative claim that that Xinjiang we are experiencing what is called genocide. But later on, at the end of his discussion, he agreed that it was because of the effect of discourse. He knows that there is no genocide, but he deliberately used genocide as a kind of provocation in order to receive the attention from the world. You understand? So, but the British representatives say that, well, if this concept gives so bad misunderstanding, misperception, then why not just give it up? Do not use genocide. You can criticize China for human rights abuses. You can criticize China for its minority policies, etc. But to deliberately defame China is not a good way. I don't think it's a good way. And we also have to be fair. Is that on the one side you can criticize China's policy on treating problems in the minorities. On the other side, you have to also condemn terrorist actions, because there are a lot of terrorist bombs, killings in that region, especially in the midst of 2000, for example, 12, 13, 14, 15, around that. I was in Xinjiang, sorry, in the beginning of 2010s. I was in Xinjiang as a tourist in 2011, and I was advised not pass by some streets because I could have some risks. You can see that it's a very tension, because a lot of bombings. People told me here there was some bombings, here was some bombings. You don't understand. So the West should be fair, that condemn these issues, and at the same time also advise the Chinese government to develop a more constructive policy to resolve the problem, rather than use harsh policies or whatever. You can criticize. So it has to be fair. This first. Second is that genocide not only defame China, it's also, on the contrary, it's opposite to the fact, because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, Xinjiang's population, let's suppose 5 million, okay, or 8 million. But after 30 years, I think it's about 11 or 13 million. I do not know exactly, but there is a growth of population. How can you claim the genocide when a local population is increased? You understand my point? Mm. So this is not good attitude and not very good way and to discuss with China and make China much more resistant in talking with you when China is feeling that China is being defamed. And also some of the Western sources. For example, one German scholar, he used a lot of sources. And those sources were from a Turkish scholar. And that Turkish scholar actually was connected with the minority resistance from Xinjiang. Then the credibility, reliability of your source is in question. You understand my point? So Xinjiang issue is a rather complicated, but the West and China should have a dialogue rather than that use a specific discourse, rhetorics to frame China in the way that China is the bad guy, okay, should be condemned. I think this is not constructive.
And then my next to last question here, going back to the war danger, what do you think would be the impact on China and on the world economy if the US were to force Russia out of the SWIFT international payment system, or similar draconian measures?
Let me tell you this, that the German chancellor, the current German chancellor, had already expressed very well, saying that if Russia was sanctioned and being pushed away from the SWIFT payment system, then the Europe could not pay Russian for its gas and oil. If we can't pay Russia, then Russia will not supply us. Then what should we do? I read news today that the US said we could supply most of the Russians' oil and gas. Then Europe began to ponder, well, then this war become a US, a very egoistic interest, because you actually want to replace Russia's gas and oil supply. That's why you want to instigate the war. So I think US has to be very cautious in its sanctions, because the only sanctions possibilities for the United States today against major powers is the financial, is payment. Okay, it's the US dollar as the intermediate currency, the SWIFT system. Okay, and when China watched this, that's even strengthened China's conclusion to develop its what we call the electronic currency. China is using a lot of energy today in investing electronic currency. This electronic currency is a real currency. It's just electronic. So it's being implemented in some big cities as a trial, okay, a trial test. And then back to the SWIFT system, then it's rather impossible, or rather create a lot of problems in the international payment system. Then the whole system will more or less collapse, because most countries watch this and they will try to think how they should react in the future if US use the same system of sanctions against them. I just mentioned China, but it can also be many other countries as well. So they have to find an alternative. And the alternative, one of the alternatives is to use other currencies rather than US dollar as much as possible. I just read news today that Chinese yuan surpass Japanese yen to be the fourth international currency. And the situation will accelerate, you know that, okay, towards in that direction. So I think that the US should think twice. And also on the China-Russia relations, I definitely think that China will help Russia in case US really implemented the sanction in pushing Russia away from SWIFT system, payment system. But China definitely will help Russia, because both of them face same pressure, same struggle, same robbery from the US. Okay, so it is very bad. It is extremely bad strategy from the US side to fight simultaneously two fronts with two superpowers. And this is what Kissinger has said many times, that during the Cold War entire period, US was able to keep relatively stable relations between US and China, and between Soviet Union and China, US at that time, Soviet Union, but keeping the two countries really fighting against each other. But now it's the opposite situation, is that the US was or is fighting with two big powers simultaneously. So I don't know what is in the mind of US politicians. I really think that the US need to redesign its strategic foreign policy.
Yeah, and we've been speaking mostly about the US, but the British really are an instigator in this, the British old empire policy of trying to drive a wedge between United States, Russia, and China. That also has a lot to do about the current situation. And we spoke before about the question of we're trying to get the United States population to understand that the whole basis for the existence of the United States was the fight against the British Empire and against this divide and conquer strategy. So rather to actually have a cooperation with Russia and China. But in conclusion, this has been very wonderful. Do you have any parting words to our audience, which is we have many people in Europe and in the United States. Do you have any parting words of advice in terms of how we should look at China and what needs to be different about our policy?
No, I think that my last words actually want to be invested on talking about Schiller Institute. This is because I really think that some of your programs, some of your projects, and some of your advocations are really interesting, and especially that Schiller Institute has a lot of ideas. For example, you just mentioned in Afghanistan, the healthcare system. I think not only in Afghanistan, you promote this idea also in Africa, okay, in developing countries. I really think that Schiller Institute should continue to promote some of the ideas, health care system in a country, especially now, the pandemic, we can see, okay, that, for example, that the rich countries, including China, we are able to produce vaccines, but not countries in the developing countries. And the US has more storage of vaccines than necessary, but Africa is still only very low percentage of people.
Yeah, I think 7%.
Yeah, 70%. And we claim there's the variation of current coronavirus came from Africa. Okay, and that's our irony. That's our irony, because yes, definitely that one day another variation of virus will come from Latin America, we're from some other part of the world. So it's rather important for the West, including China, to think some of the positive suggestions by your institute, actually. So I'm glad that you invite me for this interview, and I'm expecting to have more cooperations with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lixing.